How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Maverick Designs Woodworking Shop. My name is Tom, and today I'm going to make some of these wood American flag crosses. If it's something you're interested in seeing how I do it, then stick around. So these are actually something that I make and sell quite a lot of. The smaller, less expensive things tend to sell very good. In fact, I make as many of these as I can before I go to a show, and typically I sell every single one of the small ones that are of the American flag. The bigger ones sell, but not as quickly because they're more expensive. So I don't need to make as many of those, but if I need to, I can take orders for them as well. And these are super easy to make. And the best thing about these is that typically when I make these, I batch them out in large numbers, and I do it with scraps. As you can see, it doesn't take much wood, so very small pieces to make these. Now I'm very picky about the grain patterns in them, and you'll see all that as we go along here. And I need to make another batch because I got another show coming up, and that's what we're going to be doing today. So let's get started on it. So like I was saying before, when I make these crosses, I typically just wait until I have a whole bunch of scraps from other things that I use one-by material for, primarily concealment boxes and flags. And because the scrap just piles up after a while. And once I get a good big pile of it, or I need to make some crosses, I get all these scraps together. And I have this setup that I put onto my miter saw where I put a zero clearance fence on, just screws onto the back. I can take it on and off really easily. I have to do that because often I will need to cut a very small scrap piece like this down to 1.5 inches wide. And what happens is there's a pretty big gap in the fence here. And if I put a small piece like this against the fence to try to cut it, it falls in and out and wobbles. And trust me, I've tried to do it that way before, and it ends catastrophically. I was lucky I didn't get hurt the when I tried it last time. So I devised this method to do it, where now it's supported all the way no matter what. And then I also put this long stop block basically I made. It just sits in the T-track on top of the miter station, and I can adjust it for the various lengths that I need. The reason why I need it so long is because there is a way, but it's difficult to put a stop block here without taking everything off of the saw and try to clamp something onto the fence. It's just a pain in the butt to do that. So I put this long one on there, and I can make multiple repeatable cuts by just loosening up the hardware and sliding it back and forth as I need it. And that enables me to take these little tiny pieces of scrap that most people would throw away and turn them into stuff that I can sell. Every single piece of these crosses is 1.5 inches wide. So I start by setting my stop block to 1.5 inches and cutting all the scraps that I safely can down to that width, which is typically everything less than about 12 inches long in that grain direction, because that's what my 12-inch sliding miter saw is capable of, and I am comfortable with cutting. If your miter saw has less than a 12-inch blade, or it does not slide, it will be less. Everything longer I rip down on the table saw because it's safer and more efficient. Which lengths you do on which machine will be entirely determined by the capabilities of your tools and your comfort level. I would strongly recommend against doing anything you aren't totally comfortable with, and whenever in doubt, seek out the advice of a professional. Make sure you use a push stick or something similar to hold your workpiece in place, because you will definitely need to hold the side between the blade and the stop block, and you definitely do not want to do that with your hands at 1.5 inches. Next, I've set up my stop block at 11 inches to cut the cross beams of the crosses. It really doesn't matter what order you cut these pieces in. I did these next because there are far fewer of these pieces than the 3-inch pieces that make up the majority of the vertical part of the cross, and I can knock them out pretty quickly.
The other reason is that I can use any leftover scraps from these longer pieces to cut more 3-inch pieces when I do those later. Here I am now cutting the 3-inch pieces. Notice that I am piling up the offcuts that are less than 3 inches rather than tossing them. This is because I will use these pieces later to cut the 2¼ inch pieces that are used as supports on the back of the cross. You really get a lot of mileage out of your scraps when making these things. And like I said, here I am cutting the 2¼ inch pieces with those scraps that I had piled up from the cutoffs from the 3-inch pieces. And finally, I'm cutting the 15.5-inch vertical supports that are essentially the spine of these crosses that hold everything together and also serve as an easy means of hanging them, as you will see shortly. In this case, I cut them to length from some wider stock that I had laying around and then ripped them down to 1.5 inches on the table saw to finish up with all the cutting.
All right, that is what 20-ish crosses look like after you have cut everything up. Doesn't seem like a lot, does it? Wait till you start sanding and staining.
And now everyone's favorite part of woodworking, the sanding. Man, I wish it really went as fast as you see here, but in real life it goes much, much slower. It is, however, just as important as any other part of the process and needs to be done. Whether you sand the larger pieces first and then cut them down to size, or cut them first and then sand as I have done, is entirely up to you. I just figure if you do it first, you'll need to come back after cutting and do some more on the faces that you cut anyway, so I may as well do it all at once. The trade-off is that the smaller pieces are obviously much more tedious to sand, and there are quite a few of them, depending on the size of your batch. So I suggest you do you, but this is how I do it.
Okay, so after what seems like a century or so of sanding, you'll end up with a whole bunch of pieces like this. And in this case, this is enough for a batch of 20-ish crosses. We're going to go over what the pieces are real quick here, and I'll use this old one here as an example. It's all dusty, but okay, so starting with these are your individual pieces that make up the vertical part of the cross. They are 3 inches long by 1.5 inches wide, and it's made out of 1x material, so they're 3/4 of an inch thick. Okay. Then you have right next to them these smaller pieces, which are 2¼ inch long. Everything else is the same. And they are the support pieces that go on the back side of the cross arms to keep them stable. Next here, we have, these are 15.5 inches. This is the long support that goes in the back. That gives me the full span and leaves 1/2 inch on each side. And then they will also, of course, get keyholes like this one so that you can hang the cross after it's finished. All right, and finally you have the 11-inch pieces, which are the cross pieces of the cross. Now, logic might tell you that at this point, well, actually, let me back up for a second here. So one of the other things that I do that you probably don't need to do, unless you really want to, is I will go through each and every one of these pieces and sort them out by the way that I want them to be. So typically, when you have pieces like this, as I don't know if you can see it, but this has a bunch of straight grain growing across. I know what this is going to look like after I burn it. This has more figuring and it looks more interesting, and I know what that's going to look like after I burn it. So typically what I'll do is I will separate out the ones that look like this, the best ones, and the amount that I need for whites, because in my experience doing these crosses, the whites are the ones that tend to stand out the most, and you want to put the best, most interesting figuring or wood grain patterns in the white stripes. These right here, they also look nice when they're done, but because they get the red stain over them, they're, the wood grain is not as pronounced, so I tend to use these for the red stripes or the blues. And then what I'll also do is I'm looking at these is I'll go through and I'll find ones that have little flaws like this down in the corner, which I probably won't even use this side, but if I had something in the corner like this and I had to use that side, that would be a blue, because the blue's darker. It tends to hide those kind of things better. So I make these the blue, and then of course the stars sometimes hide some of those flaws as well. But so I'll go through this whole stack of 3-inch ones, and I'll separate out between which are going to be red, which are going to be blue, and which are going to be white. These and these not so much, because they go on the back. I will go through and pick out what I think are the best sides and flip them up, because those are the ones that will show on the back after it's done. And then these, I'll do the exact same things as the whites. So these are going to be half blue, half red, or half blue and half white. And so I'll look at these, and I'll look at something like this, where I have this knot here and a little bit of a crack. It gives it some character, right? Some people like that. Honestly, I don't care for it that much. So what I'll do is I'll do the same thing that I do with these. Anything that has something like this on it, this will be the blue side every time, and this will be the white or the red side, and I will also go through them and distinguish which ones I'm going to use for the white and which ones I'm going to use for the red. So let me see if I can find a good example here. So like something like this, with this straight grain going across, while it looks nice after it's burned, it's not like super interesting. And something like this is actually a good example, is much more interesting, because I have this cool looking flame type figuring in the wood. So typically what I'll do here is I'll make this blue and this white for this piece. Oh wow, this side's even better. And so that's what it's going to look like, and I'll separate these out. Like this will be white and blue, and then something like this will be red and blue, and I'll separate those all out. Now, before I actually go and start putting together which ones are going to go with which sets or which cross, which I also do, and again, it's something you may not necessarily need to do, you might not care. I mean, they're all wood, and you can put them, you can mix match them haphazardly as much as you want. I tend to try to get them organized into pieces that are similar. So if I feel like this particular wood grain looks better together in these sets, then I will organize them. So these are going to be this cross, these are going to be this cross, these are going to be this cross. And it sounds like a lot of work, and it is kind of a bunch of work. It takes an hour or so to do that, but I do it because it's just how I am. But anyway, you might think that that's the next logical step here, but it is not, and I'll tell you why. So the other thing that we have to do is we have to burn these. Now, I will go through again and flip up what I think are the A sides and have the B sides down. But typically what happens very often is I will burn what I think is the A side, and especially in these ones that I burn both sides, regardless of what they do. Like these, I won't typically burn both sides unless I need to, because one side is not going to be seen anyway. But with these, both sides are going to be seen, so I burn both sides. And sometimes the side that I think is the best side after it's burned is not. The other side actually ends up looking much nicer. So then I'll go through and I'll organize that how I want it, and then I'll organize them by sets, and then we'll start staining. But that's where we are now, so I'm going to start going through all these, and then we'll get to burning.
So this process is pretty much exactly the way I described. I'm just organizing all of these to separate primarily which ones are going to be the whites, and then I'll pull off to the side the ones that are more than likely going to be blues, and then the ones that can be red or whites, and then I'll supplement from those to fill in the ones that I need for the whites after that, and get it all organized that way before I start burning.
Okay, so all that took about 30 minutes or so. Over here we have the back braces. Here we have the small back braces. Let's do it over here. Here I got the ones that I'm pretty sure are going to be white, and I'm pretty sure are going to be red. Sometimes that changes. Same with these. I might burn them and find one of the ones I thought should be a white is not going to be a white, and one of the ones I thought was going to be a red is going to end up being a white. But I end up going through them again. I know it's over and over. It's repetitive, and the average person doesn't need to do this. But it's the only way that I can sleep at night, so it's what it is for me. But anyway, okay, so I have 3 stacks here. These are the ones that I am pretty sure are going to be white. These are the ones that I am probably 100% sure are going to be blue or red. And these are ones that can be either or. So I'll pick the best ones out of these to add to the white when I go to arrange the way all the crosses are going to be assembled. So the next step now is to get this stuff burned. I almost forgot, before burning, we need to add keyholes to the back supports. This can be done either before or after burning, and I would actually suggest doing it after because the edges of the keyhole tend to get a little extra crispy when you burn them after. As you can see, I actually did it before this time, but either way works. The way I do this is I set stop blocks on both sides of the workpiece, one to mark where I want to start the keyhole and the other where I want the keyhole to end. How far that is totally up to you, but I usually do them at about 1/2 inch long. To me, there really isn't any reason to make them any longer than that. What I do is I set the fence so that the bit is centered on the workpiece, set the bit so that the hole for the screw head will be about 1/4 inch deep into the material, and then use the first stop as a guide to lower the workpiece down onto the bit, which cuts the hole at the bottom of the keyhole that the screw head goes into. Then move the piece along the fence toward the other stop about 1/2 inch away, which makes the channel for the screw head to slide behind when hanging the cross. I then slide it back to the first stop and turn off the router. I imagine you could stop it at either position, but that's just how I do it, so I can lift the workpiece straight up and off when it stops. Just make sure you wait for it to stop completely. If you try to lift it off with the bit still turning, in my experience, it's not only unsafe, but you're very likely to screw up your keyhole. Alright, so burning or torching, whichever you prefer to call it, is another pretty straightforward and somewhat long and tedious process. While I was filming this, I took quite a bit of time to explain my technique in a lot of detail, but as I was editing, I realized that was going to make this video way too long, so instead I just decided to put that out as its own separate video shortly after this one. But in a nutshell, what you want to do is you want to make sure you're burning on something that's not flammable. In my case, I used these pavers that were left over from a landscaping project I did a while back. You'll also want to make sure that you have a fire extinguisher on hand, just in case, and pay attention to where you are pointing that flame, particularly you don't sweep yourself with it or you're going to have a really bad day. Take your time and pay attention to what you're doing. Like anything else, if you're not comfortable with it, seek professional advice or assistance. Other than that, I kind of treat burning as an art form. It's essentially painting, but your brush is a flame. Like anything else, it takes a bit of practice to perfect your technique, and I'll include all my personal tips and tricks for how to do that in the How to Burn video. Once I get it done, for those of you who don't see this one in the first few days or week or so that I post it, I will add a link to it in the description below. Next up, I do more sanding because I love it so much. But in all seriousness, the burning process leaves a significant amount of carbon residue. I assume it's carbon, whatever the black stuff is. It leaves it on your workpiece, and if you don't knock the loose stuff off, it will get all over your fingers. You'll get smudges all over the place and generally just make a mess. I'm using a fine grit sanding sponge here, but anything in the vicinity of 220 should work just fine. I only do a couple of very light passes on each side to get the loose stuff off, then wipe it down with a damp cloth. This might lighten up the burn just a little, and you can adjust for that with either a little darker burn when torching or with fewer or lighter passes when sanding once you get the feel for it. This also gives you the opportunity to lighten up and even out any dark spots that you might have made when torching. The wiping down with the damp cloth serves a couple of purposes. One, it removes the surface residue that you've just knocked off with the sanding, and it also shows you what your workpiece will look like when finish is applied so that you can sand as necessary to get the desired look. It's part of the burning process, and like I said, it's an art that you will get better at with practice.
The next step is to stain. And as you can see, I'm starting with red. The only thing you really need to know about this step is that you'll need one red and one blue piece for each cross that is stained, not only on the front facing surface and the two short sides, but they'll also need to be fully stained on one of the long sides for the red that will be at the very bottom of the cross and the blue that will be at the very top of the cross. So if you're making a batch of 10, you'll need 10 like this for each red and blue. Now, on the other long side and on all the rest of the long sides, including on all of the whites, if you do decide to do whites, they'll be mated together and glued to each other. So you want as little stain as possible on those faces in order to get full glue adhesion. But you will need to hit the very edges along the top and the sides. Not so important with the white, and you don't need to spend a lot of time getting these perfect. Just get some color on them. This is due to the fact that not all of your pieces will be exactly the same thickness or might move a little over time, and you're not going to want to see the unstained wood at the gaps where the faces mate if that happens. It sounds more difficult than it really is, and like everything else, you'll get into a rhythm with it after a while. As it turns out, I had a whole lot to say about stains and staining, but like the burning, I had to cut it all out or this video would have been an hour and a half long. I do think there's some good information to be had from that footage though, having to do with my thoughts on the old formula Minwax water-based semi-transparent stain versus the new formula, which comes with some challenges in regards to the colors available and the application of it. But I'll very likely make that its own video as well for any of you interested in seeing my tips and tricks to overcoming those issues. So keep an eye out for it if that's you.
Okay, so all of the individual pieces are done. I like to have them be very similar instead of having them wildly different grain patterns. So I will put them in rows of ones that are very similar, and then I'll start making stacks of 3 with them.
I should mention that you don't need to do this unless you have a touch of OCD like me. You could just put them together in any combination and I'm sure they would look just fine, but it's up to you. It would definitely save you a lot of time if you didn't do all the sorting and matching that I do, but once I get everything sorted into matching trios, I'll put them together into the crosses, laying out the pieces in combinations that are aesthetically pleasing to me. Now that those are all sorted, it's time for the longer horizontal pieces. These are 11 inches long, and when you take away the 3 inches in the center where the vertical pieces will attach, that leaves 4 inches left over on either side. So what I do is measure 4 inches in from the right side and use a speed square to mark lines across the pieces. To the left of the line will be blue, and to the right they will either be red or white, but it requires an extra step or technique in order to stain them half and half like this and still maintain a nice clean line down the center. To achieve this, I tap razor blades into the wood across the line and then stain both sides of the blade. These will be stained similarly to the rest of the pieces. You'll fully stain the faces and the short edges. Inside, where the 2 horizontal pieces will mate, you'll want to just get some color around the edges as with the smaller pieces, and you want to ensure that the unstained wood doesn't show if there's any wood movement later on down the road, but you also want to make sure there's plenty of unfinished area for the glue to adhere to. The outer edges will need to be fully stained, except for a couple of inches in the center where the smaller pieces will be mated and glued on. Again, it sounds more complicated than it is, and you'll eventually get it and get into a rhythm with it.
Okay, so everything is now stained and ready for assembly. The way that I did this the very first time that I ever made these was I actually glued them all together in one shot, all 11 pieces. And that is doable, and you can do it that way if you want, but for me it's kind of difficult to keep all 11 pieces aligned and make sure everything stays flat, because when you start putting clamps on it, things start moving around, and especially when there's 11 little pieces that are all glued together, it's not quite as manageable as the other way that I now do it, which is the way I'm going to do it this time. And that is, I will take and glue the pieces together in 3 main parts, one of which being the 2 cross pieces. I will glue those together, and then I will take the 3 blue pieces that go on top and glue those together into one piece, and then take the 6 white and red stripes that go on the bottom and glue those together into one piece. Now, as I go through and do all of those, by the time I get to the end, the first ones will be dry enough for me to work with. They won't come apart if I pick them up. So then I can take the 3 pieces at that point and just do the 2 glue joints and put those together, flip them over, put the support bars on the back with some brad nails, and then they're done. Set them off to the side. And that's the way I'm going to do it this time, because it's just more manageable that way. At least it is for me. And honestly, I've been wanting to build a jig for this for the longest time, and I even thought about it today when I was at work. I was like, man, if I would just build a jig, I could get everything nice and squared up, lay it in there, glue it all up in one piece, go to the next one. And I was thinking about ways that I could do that, maybe do multiple glue ups at once. And that would be great. And eventually I'll do that, and I'll probably make a video of that jig. So for those of you guys that are interested in doing this sort of thing, when I make that jig, look out for that video, and it'll make your life easier, hopefully, by building the same jig. But for now, I need to get these done because there's other things that I have to do before I get ready for this event that I'm going to, and I don't have time to build a jig right now. So I'm going to do it the way that I've always done it, the way I just described to you. All right, so let's get started with that.
I assemble these crosses and basically all of my American flag type glue ups with the back facing up and the finished side facing down. Because of this, I recommend you use something underneath to protect your finished surfaces. Here, I'm using a piece of toolbox liner material from an old roll of the stuff that I've had for ages. This particular one is a thin polyethylene type foam that comes in a roll. I think it was a Craftsman brand that I got from Sears probably more than 10 years ago, but it's not hard to find something similar, and it's relatively inexpensive. I'll generally wipe up any glue that gets on it between crosses and before it dries, but one thing I really like about this stuff is that even if your glue dries on it, it's not very difficult to wipe it off with a damp rag, and it can be used over and over for quite some time. I have it on most of my jigs that I do glue ups on and everything else. It works out really well for me. But you don't have to use this stuff either. You could always put down an old towel or a piece of foam or whatever you want, really, as long as it protects the finished faces of your pieces while you're working on the back side of them. What you want to do here is lay down a really thin line of glue on one side to mate your pieces. You don't need a ton of it because you'll want to avoid as much squeeze out as you can, and also because the supports on the back of the crosses do all the heavy lifting when it comes to holding these things together. For that same reason, I don't even bother clamping these. The hydraulic action of the glue holds them together well enough for the very little bit of maneuvering that you need to do with them, and then the supports act as clamps to hold them together while the glue dries once they're installed, which is what I'll do next. So I'll get the pieces glued up together, then use my hand to apply light clamping pressure while I tack the small support pieces on the back. As always, I have a damp cloth on hand to clean up any glue squeeze out or spills. A pick is also very useful here to get down into the mating line to get any squeeze out that you can't reach with the rag. With these small supports, I just put a nice layer of glue on them and then place them about a ½ inch in from the edge on either side and then center them vertically by eye. Then I just attach them to the back with 1 1/4 inch 18 gauge brad nails. Exact placement of these is not critical, as you aren't using them for anything except supports to both hold these long pieces together and also to support the cross itself laterally so that when it sits flat on the wall when installed, it doesn't rock back and forth. Once you get it all put together, don't forget to flip it over and clean up any glue squeeze out that's on the front face before it dries up. Okay, before I start gluing up the short pieces, I take the blue piece that will be at the bottom of the 3-piece blue stack, and which will mate to the top of the long pieces, and line it up visually with the stain line. I then make a few short registration marks across the 2 pieces that I will later use to align them when I glue the stack of the 3 blues to the top of the long pieces. Once I get the blue marked, I do the same thing with the white piece that will be at the top of the 6-piece red and white stack, where it mates to the bottom of the long pieces. Now, you can also do this from the back when everything is in place by just measuring 4 inches in from the edge of the long piece and placing your stacks of short pieces that way. And theoretically, that should work if all of your other measurements were accurate to begin with. But I've had mixed results doing this, and the pieces sometimes end up slightly out of alignment with the stain lines. I've found that this registration mark method is the most accurate and consistent way for me to do this. Once you get those marked, you're going to do basically the same thing you did with the long ones and apply a thin line of glue to hold them together. What you need to pay attention to here is just to make sure the blue and red pieces that are fully stained on the long edge are appropriately positioned at the top and bottom of their stacks, respectively. And that the blue and white pieces that you just marked are appropriately positioned at the bottom and top of their stacks where they belong as well. Again, I don't bother clamping these because the long back support will act as a clamp to hold everything together once it's installed. If you're a little uncomfortable doing it this way, by all means put a clamp on them. Just make sure that they remain in alignment after they're clamped, because if the clamps aren't perfectly positioned, the pieces will slide around and get out of alignment, and that's what happens to me, and that's why I don't like clamping them at this point. I've just been making these things for so long now that it's easier for me to just line them up with my fingers as I'm installing the support. But I will tell you that I did used to clamp them when I first started, so do whatever is most comfortable for you. Once I get the jig made, that will solve that issue, but until then, this is just the way I do it. Now, once you get the 3 sections glued up, carefully flip them over and assemble the cross using those registration marks to line everything up. Apply another thin line of glue to attach the 2 short piece stacks to the long pieces and put the whole thing together. Again, you can use a clamp here if you want, but I find it's very difficult to keep everything lined up when I do that. It's just much easier for me to immediately install the support and use that to hold everything together. Like the other supports, apply a generous layer of glue on the back of that long support, and then make sure your keyhole is at the top before you nail it into place. Yes, I've glued one of these on upside down before, and you don't want to do that. You'll then want to get it centered the best you can. Again, if your measurements were all correct, this will be 3/4 of an inch in from either side and a 1/2 inch in from the top and bottom. Again, do the best you can here, but it's not a project killer if you don't get this exactly right, because you're hanging the cross from a single keyhole, so you'll be able to adjust enough to compensate and get it straight when you hang it if it's off a little. What I do when I nail this long support on is to make sure the top of it is centered and positioned properly, and then put 1 nail in through the support and into the top piece. This will allow you to move it a little at the bottom to get that lined up. Once you get the bottom where you want it, put a little pressure on the whole thing from top to bottom and then fire in a nail at the bottom. This will serve to apply a small amount of clamping pressure from the support, and then you can put the rest of your nails in. And it really doesn't matter how many you use, though I would suggest keeping it to 4 or less per piece. I use 3 in the shape of a triangle on each piece. And no, I can't tell you why. It's just what I do, and it satisfies my OCD. But once you've got all your nails in, your cross is fully assembled. At this point, clean up any glue squeeze out from the supports on the back, then flip it over and do the same on the front. And one last thing that I do here is something else that can be optional for you, but I also take a dead blow hammer and tap each piece to make sure that it's fully seated against the support, since that's essentially what holds the whole thing together. Once you've completed the assembly, you're ready to move on to the stars. I just spread the stars out on my pavers and then burn them to the darkness I desire. You'll need 10 of these 1-inch laser cut stars per cross of this size. They are relatively inexpensive and can easily be found on Amazon and Etsy in several sizes and amounts. Due to the way I arrange the stars on the cross, which I'll explain in more detail in a second, I need to sand off the top point of the uppermost star on each cross so that it will be flush with the edge rather than hanging over, and I just do this on my oscillating belt sander. I imagine you could also do it on a random orbital sander. It would just take a little bit longer maybe. Once that's done, I hit those fresh sanded edges with the torch real quick so that they blend in and don't look out of place. All right, the next to last thing to do is to glue on the stars. There are other ways to do this if you don't want to buy and glue on stars, like using a Dremel to hand carve them, painting them on, or using a CNC. But I personally like the 3D effect this method gives, so this is how I do it. Now, the normal full-sized American flags that I make are 19.5 inches tall by 37 inches long with 1.5 inch stripes and 1 inch stars. Because the stripes on this size cross are also 1.5 inches, I basically treat them as if I had cut them right out of a full-sized flag, and I arrange the stars in the union the exact same way, which makes these crosses proportionally accurate. To do this, I use the same template that I made for my flags. I imagine there are other, possibly better ways to do this, but it's just how I've always done it and it works for me. If you want to do it the same way, you'll need to make yourself something similar or come up with some other method of spacing your stars out. You'll see this template being used again in my flag build video, which will be one of the next couple of videos I put out, and I'll give an overview of how I made it in that video. Anyway, I line that template up with the edges of my union on the flag, or the cross in this case, clamp it down, and then use a punch or a pick to make small holes in the cross to mark the center point of each star. Now, I'm tapping with a hammer here, very lightly, but you can also just push it by hand if you want. It's only pine after all, and they don't need to be deep at all, just a little divot to mark the spot, basically. So then I lay out all of my stars using those little holes for reference and then glue them on. I used to use wood glue for this, but that can be a bit time consuming as you'll get squeeze out and you'll spend a considerable amount of time removing it with your pick, which is rather tedious and just about as fun as sanding. But ever since I discovered CA glue, that's what I've been using instead because it takes a whole lot less time. If you go this route, you can use activator, which I'm doing here, but you have to be careful about doing this because with the activator, you only have one shot at it. Once you drop it on, it's there and it's not moving. If you're not comfortable with that, you can also do it without the activator, which will give you several full seconds to reposition as needed, but you'll have to be careful not to move it after you've got it positioned where you want it, because it does take a couple of minutes to harden up without the activator. I suggest using a medium thickness CA glue because the thin is just way too watery. Clear is obviously the best choice here, but here I'm using black, which works fine as well, because even if you get a little squeeze out, it blends in with the union and it really isn't noticeable as long as you don't use too much. I basically just drop a little dot of the stuff right onto the hole, then spray the activator on the star and stick it on. If you look at that top star, you can see why I sand the top point off of them. So I've had a lot of success doing it this way. And also, if you or your customer has a star pop off down the road, because it does happen, it's very simple to just pop it back on with a little super glue. If you have a CNC, a better method might be to design and cut a template with slightly oversized stars so that you can just use that to lay them into place rather than the way I do it. And since I have a CNC now, I may just do that myself when I get a chance. And if I do, I might start selling those on a website or Etsy or something, and I'll post something about it here on YouTube. So if you have any interest in that, be sure to subscribe and keep your eyes open for it. Finally, I use a self-inking stamp to apply my logo to the back of the crosses and then apply the finish. My finish of choice is the everyday clear lacquer that you can find at your local big box store. It does give the crosses a glossy finish, which I like, but I've seen other woodworkers finish things with lacquers that have a more satin type finish as well. So if that's your preference, I'm sure it wouldn't be too difficult to find some. There's nothing special here. I basically just put a couple of coats on the back of the crosses and then flip them over and put about 4 on the front. I like lacquer because it's crazy easy to apply compared to brushed on poly. It dries in a matter of minutes. There's no sanding required or needed between coats. It's super easy to fix problem spots if necessary, and it leaves a great looking, water resistant, and durable finish that is perfect for indoor use. And that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you're still here, I'll leave you with the best tip yet: what to do with whatever scraps you have left from this project. It doesn't get any better than hanging out with your family, roasting marshmallows on a cool, clear night. If I forgot anything or you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll answer. Please consider subscribing and select all notifications with that bell icon if you want to know when future videos come out. As always, thanks for watching, stay safe, and happy woodworking.